I've always thought that New York City was the perfect place for dreams to come true. The lights, the sounds, the endless energy, it felt like anything was possible. But in the back of my mind, I always knew it would take more than just talent to make it here. It would take trust. And I trusted Mia. She wasn't just my business partner. She was my best friend. We started from the ground up together, sketching designs on napkins, running to fabric stores with no money in our pockets, working late into the night, pushing each other to be better. We shared our dreams, our fears, our secrets. So when Mia told me she had secured a spot at New York Fashion Week, I thought we were finally going to make it. This was our chance to show the world what we were capable of. But the day everything changed, I couldn't have known how one moment could shatter it all. It was 2 days before our big show. We were in the studio just putting the final touches on our collection. The clothes hung on the racks, the vibrant fabrics shining under the studio lights. I remember looking at the designs, feeling proud of how far we had come. "Mia, do you think we're ready?" I asked, adjusting the dress on the mannequin. She was focused, too focused. Her fingers traced the seams, her mind somewhere else. "Yeah, we're good," she replied, her voice tight. I caught a glimpse of her phone screen on the counter. Something caught my eye, an email. The subject line, "Partnership Offer Exclusive Collection Reveal." I didn't think much of it at first. Mia had received partnership offers before, but this one seemed different. I walked over to check and my heart dropped. The email was from a major fashion brand. The partnership was confirmed for Mia's designs. But the designs on the email weren't Mia's. They were mine. The collection that I had poured my soul into, the designs that I had envisioned, drafted and stitched with my own hands, had been sent as Mia's. My stomach twisted. I stood frozen, staring at the screen, unable to breathe. "Mia," my voice cracked and she turned to me, her face pale. "What's wrong?" she asked, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. I pointed at the screen, my fingers trembling. "What is this?" Mia's eyes widened, and for a split second, she didn't say anything. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My best friend, my partner, had stolen my designs. She was presenting them to the world as if they were hers. And in doing so, she had stolen my dream. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined. This wasn't just a business move, it was personal. She knew everything about me. The late nights, the sacrifices, the vulnerability I had shown her, and now she was throwing it all away, using my blood, sweat, and tears to climb higher. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't even process what was happening. All I knew was that everything I had worked for had been ripped away in an instant. "You have to explain," I whispered, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. But Mia remained silent. I didn't wait for her explanation. I grabbed my bag, my heart racing, and I ran out of the studio. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not with her. Not in that space where trust had turned into betrayal. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, my mind racing. How could she do this to me? Why, I asked myself over and over again. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt an intense, burning rage inside me. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. This wasn't the end of my story. This was the beginning of something else. A new plan, a new purpose. Mia had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her steal my success. I was going to show the world the real Ruby, the real creator behind these designs. I was going to rise above the betrayal, and I knew exactly how I was going to do it. The moment I left that studio, something inside me shifted. The anger that had burned so fiercely turned into something colder, something more controlled. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I stayed awake, consumed by the thought of Mia's betrayal. It didn't make sense. How could someone who knew me better than anyone else do this? And why I needed answers. But more than that, I needed revenge. I kept replaying that moment in my head, the email, the designs, every detail. Mia hadn't just stolen my work, she had stolen my future. She had taken what was mine, the very thing I had worked my entire life for. And now she was going to showcase it to the world as if it was hers. The anger inside me flared again, but this time it was no longer just about the hurt. It was about what I was going to do next. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. I needed to make sure I wasn't overreacting. I needed to be smart, calculated, and strategic. Mia's actions are clear, my lawyer said, looking over the contract that Mia and I had signed when we started our business. This is intellectual property theft, and you have a strong case for both civil and criminal action. I stared at the contract in front of me, my fingers tracing the words as if I could make them disappear. I wasn't sure I wanted to drag this through the courts. That would take time, and I didn't have time. The clock was ticking, and New York Fashion Week was just days away. You don't have to make this public yet, he continued, reading my thoughts. You can file privately and settle this quietly. I paused. I wanted to scream at him that I didn't care about settling this quietly, that I wanted to make Mia pay to see the world know what she had done. But I held back. The legal route could take months, years even. I needed something faster. Thank you, I said, standing up. I'll think about it. As I walked out of the office, a plan began to take shape in my mind. Mia thought she could steal my designs and walk away with my success, but she didn't realize something. These designs weren't just fabric and thread. They were me. They were my soul, my vision. And I wasn't going to let her take that away from me. I went back to my studio. I had a lot of work to do, but more importantly, I needed to prove a point. The world didn't know who Mia was, but they knew me. They knew Ruby, the designer behind the designs, and I was going to make sure they knew it all over again. Over the next few days, I worked day and night reworking the designs Mia had stolen. I made small tweaks, perfecting each piece, adding my own signature touch. And while I worked, I also kept an eye on social media. Mia had already begun posting about her upcoming fashion show. She was bragging about the partnership, posting teasers of my designs as if they were hers. I smiled. The world thought Mia was the genius behind those designs. But I was about to take it all back. I wasn't just going to compete at Fashion Week, I was going to steal her spotlight. The moment she revealed her collection, I would reveal mine. But there was more. I was going to show the world the truth. I made the decision. I would post my collection first before hers even hit the runway. The post would include everything: the original sketches, the early designs, the entire process. And I would tag Mia in the post. There was no way she could hide it. The world would see the truth. But I needed to time it perfectly. If I revealed it too early, Mia would have time to scramble. If I revealed it too late, the damage would be done. The reveal had to be dramatic. It had to hurt. By the end of the day, I had everything set up. My social media was ready, my website was updated with the new collection. All I had to do now was wait. And then the moment I had been planning for weeks arrived. Mia made her first big post about her show, a teaser video featuring clips of the designs. The comments flooded in, everyone praising her for her genius, for her vision. I clicked on my phone screen and smiled. It was time. I hit post. The hours that followed felt like the longest of my life. I watched the notifications flood in. My post went viral almost immediately. Comments from old clients, fashion critics, and even celebrities flooded my feed. My heart raced as I scrolled, watching Mia's carefully constructed world begin to crumble in front of my eyes. People were starting to question her. Isn't that Ruby's design? Didn't Mia say she created these pieces? The comments spread like wildfire. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, but beneath it, my heart ached. I couldn't help but feel guilty. But guilt didn't matter anymore. What mattered was reclaiming my name, my work, my future. I stayed up late monitoring every reaction. I couldn't believe how fast it was happening. The news outlets were picking up the story. Ruby's designs exposed at Fashion Week, that was the headline everywhere. It felt like justice, but it also felt like a punch to the gut. The world was seeing Mia for who she really was. Then 2 hours later, Mia posted a response. Her tone was defensive, accusatory. "I don't know what kind of games Ruby is playing," she wrote. But these designs are mine. I have proof, and anyone who knows fashion knows that these designs were always mine. She even posted photos of the original sketches, the ones she had never shown me, the ones she had fabricated as her own. I read her message, the anger rising again in me hotter than before. Mia was trying to turn the tables, trying to convince people that she was the victim. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate the narrative. Not this time. I sat back in my chair looking at the screen. I had one more move to make. I had to show the world what Mia had done, how far she'd gone to steal my work. There was one piece of evidence: Mia didn't have the original photos from the first time I sketched my designs. Photos I had taken on my phone as a backup just in case. I had kept everything, every message, every email, every sketch. Mia thought she could erase me, but I had proof that would bring her down. I started typing up a post, preparing to make the final reveal. As my fingers flew across the keyboard, my mind raced. I thought about everything Mia and I had been through, how we had shared dreams and made promises to each other. And now she was trying to destroy everything I had worked for, using my work to climb up the ladder. I wasn't just fighting for my designs anymore. I was fighting for everything that I had built. My reputation, my career, my place in this industry. I hit send. The post was simple, but it was powerful. I shared the photo of my original sketches, time-stamped with my phone's gallery date in full view. I didn't even need to say anything else. The evidence spoke for itself, and I tagged Mia, "No escaping this time." I sat back, my heart pounding as I watched the post go live. The response was instant. People started digging into the photos, the timestamps. The truth was undeniable. The floodgates opened. And just when I thought Mia's world was crumbling, something else happened. My phone rang. It was my agent. "Ruby, the Fashion Week organizers want to meet with you. They've seen the posts and they want to talk about featuring your collection instead of Mia's." My jaw dropped. This was everything I had worked for. Mia had stolen my designs, but now I was about to take back everything. I was going to be the one on the runway. I was going to have my moment. I couldn't believe it. I had played the game, and I was winning. I wasn't just going to reclaim what Mia had taken from me. I was going to show her that no one could steal my future. But even as excitement filled me, there was something else creeping in. A question that lingered at the back of my mind. What would Mia do next? The days leading up to Fashion Week felt like an eternity. Every time I opened my phone, there were new headlines about the Ruby versus Mia showdown. Mia's collection had been pulled from the show's lineup, replaced by mine. And yet, she wasn't done fighting. Every time I saw her name pop up in my notifications, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something. It was a feeling I couldn't quite ignore, even though the world was finally seeing her for what she was. Fashion Week had arrived, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The moment I stepped into the venue, the energy was palpable. Models were rushing around, stylists were putting final touches on outfits, and photographers were everywhere. I tried to calm my nerves, but the reality of it all was overwhelming. This was my moment, but it was also a moment for Mia to lash out. I could feel the tension thick in the air. As the show began, I took my place backstage, watching as the first model stepped onto the runway wearing one of my designs. The crowd cheered, the flashes from cameras illuminating the space. This was it, the culmination of everything I had worked for. But just as I was about to relax, the sound of footsteps approaching made my heart race. I turned, and there she was, Mia standing just a few feet away, her eyes cold with fury. "Ruby," she said, her voice a low growl. "You think this is over?" I could feel her rage radiating off her, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you want, Mia?" I asked, trying to steady my breath. I wasn't going to back down now, not when I was so close to winning. "I want you to understand something," she spat. "You might have won the battle, but I'm still going to destroy you. You think you can just walk in here and take everything from me. You're nothing without me." The words hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I stared at her, calm on the outside, but burning with fury inside. "You've already destroyed yourself, Mia. This whole time you've been using me, manipulating me, stealing from me. And now the world knows who you really are." Her face twisted with anger, and she stepped closer to me. "You don't know anything about me, Ruby. You think you're the only one who's suffered. I've worked just as hard as you. You think you've been the only one fighting for your place in this industry. You don't get to take everything from me." I shook my head slowly, her words falling flat in the face of everything I knew to be true. "You took my work, Mia. You took my heart and soul, and you turned it into something that wasn't yours. I'm not going to let you win, not this time." The silence between us was thick, charged with the weight of everything unsaid. I wanted to lash out, to say more, to expose everything she had done, but I didn't. Instead, I stood tall, letting the truth settle between us like a final, undeniable fact. Mia opened her mouth to say something else, but at that moment the first model walked out onto the runway again, this time with a different look, one of the pieces Mia had stolen. The contrast between the two collections was stark, and I saw the shift in the crowd, the excitement, the awe, the undeniable appreciation for what they were seeing. It was happening. The attention was on me. "Are you ready for your moment?" the stylist asked, her voice breaking through the tension. Mia glared at me one last time before turning and storming off. I took a deep breath. This was it. It wasn't just a show, it was my declaration of who I was. My designs weren't just about fashion, they were about my spirit, my creativity, my identity. I stepped onto the runway and the lights hit me like a wave. The audience's eyes were all on me now. My heartbeat matched the pounding rhythm of the music. I was walking not just for my designs, but for myself. I wasn't going to be erased again. But just as I reached the end of the runway, I saw her, Mia, standing in the crowd, her face twisted in a mixture of rage and defeat. I could see the jealousy in her eyes, and it fueled me. This was my victory. Mia had thought she could take everything from me, but what she didn't realize was that she could never steal my spirit, my creativity, my soul. As I turned, taking the final step off the runway, I saw the photographers capturing every moment. It wasn't over yet, but it was close. And I had finally gotten what I wanted. The days following my debut at Fashion Week felt like a whirlwind. The media buzz was relentless. Every major fashion magazine, influencer, and journalist was covering my collection. The images of my designs were everywhere, shared across social media platforms, showcased in magazine spreads, and even discussed on fashion talk shows. I was living in a world I had only dreamed of, but it felt hollow in some ways. The phone calls came in nonstop. Brands wanted to work with me. Designers were offering collaborations. It was everything I had hoped for, but the victory didn't feel as sweet as I thought it would. Mia had disappeared from the public eye. Her social media was silent. No response from her team, no rebuttal to the accusations I had posted. She had vanished. It was almost as if she were trying to erase herself from the whole debacle. And for a moment, I thought maybe she was lying low, regrouping for a counterattack. But the longer I waited for her next move, the more I realized that maybe, just maybe, she had given up. But I couldn't let myself feel too comfortable. There was still so much left unsettled. A week later, I got the call I had been dreading. It wasn't from Mia. It was from the legal team representing her. "Ruby, we need to talk about the situation," the lawyer said. "Mia wants to make things right." I sat in silence, staring at the phone as if it might bite me. Make things right. How I asked my voice flat. "She's willing to meet with you face to face to discuss a settlement." A settlement. I didn't need to hear more. My stomach tightened at the thought of sitting down with Mia, of hearing her explain her actions as if it could somehow make things better. The idea of it felt wrong, like some part of me would be forced to forgive her, to let go of everything I had fought for. But there was something more beneath that feeling. Part of me knew I had to face her, not because I wanted closure, but because I needed to look her in the eye and understand if she was ever really sorry. I agreed to the meeting. When I walked into the coffee shop where we had arranged to meet, Mia was already sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She looked different, smaller, like the weight of the world had finally caught up with her. I sat down across from her, the silence between us stretching like an abyss. I waited for her to speak, but she just stared down at the table, taking slow, deliberate sips from her cup. Finally, after what felt like hours, she looked up at me. "I don't know how to say this, Ruby," she said, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "I was wrong. And I'm sorry." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to jump up to scream at her to tell her how much she had hurt me, but I didn't. I stayed seated, my heart pounding. "Sorry doesn't change what you did." "I know," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I want you to understand why I did it. I was scared, Ruby. I saw you succeeding and I thought I was going to be left behind. I wanted to be someone too. I didn't think about the consequences." I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. For the first time, I could see the fear behind her actions. But it didn't change anything. "You made the wrong choice," I said firmly. "You chose to betray me. And you hurt me, Mia. You took everything I had worked for, and you threw it away like it was nothing. And no matter how sorry you are, I can't forget that." There was a long pause. I could see her eyes glisten with tears, but I didn't soften. Not yet. Not until I felt I had nothing left to prove. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I want you to know that I regret it, more than you could ever understand." I nodded slowly, taking in the weight of her words. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Mia, but I'll never forget what you did. You showed me who you really are." And with that, I stood up. The meeting wasn't the dramatic confrontation I had expected. There were no more accusations, no more bitterness, just a moment of understanding that still left a painful gap. I wasn't looking for closure. I was looking for the strength to keep moving forward to put this chapter behind me. I left the coffee shop and walked back into the world I had fought so hard to be a part of. The world had changed. And so had I. Mia had taken my designs, but she hadn't taken my future. And as I walked into the bright lights of the fashion industry, I realized that there was no turning back. I had made it not despite the betrayal, but because of it. And that was the lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Weeks passed, and the noise around Fashion Week slowly faded. My name was now known in ways I had never imagined. Collaborations flooded in from top-tier brands to emerging designers who saw potential in my work. For the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged. But something was missing. Even as the offers came pouring in, even as my designs graced the covers of magazines, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't truly won yet. Mia's absence from the spotlight felt like a gaping hole, and I wasn't sure if that hole would ever be filled. I had fought so hard to get here, but the emptiness of it all weighed on me. I was no longer just Ruby the designer, I was Ruby the victor. But the victory felt hollow, without closure. I spent weeks evaluating what I wanted next, wondering if this success, this recognition would ever feel like enough. It was then that I realized it would never feel complete until I reclaimed everything I had lost. The trust, the friendships, and the feeling of being truly seen for the work I had done without the shadow of betrayal hanging over me. One evening, as I was looking over my next collection, my phone rang again. "Ruby, it was my agent. We've been contacted by a major fashion brand. They want you to lead a new campaign. They want you to be the face of their next season." I could hardly believe it. To be the face of a major brand. This was the kind of opportunity that only comes once in a lifetime. "I'll do it," I said without hesitation. But something inside me knew that the real victory wasn't in this campaign. It wasn't in the interviews, the photo shoots, or the magazine covers. No, the real victory would be in my ability to stand on my own terms and let go of the weight of the past. I wasn't just going to let the betrayal define me. I was going to use it as fuel to build something bigger, something that Mia couldn't touch. Months passed, and as my new collection launched to critical acclaim, something unexpected happened. Mia reached out again. This time it wasn't through a lawyer. It wasn't through an apology. It was through a direct message. Ruby, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I'm trying to make things right. I've been working on my own collection, and I want you to see it. I want you to know that I've changed. The message was short, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. Mia had been working in silence, trying to redeem herself, trying to find her own path again. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. A part of me felt the anger flood back the hurt that I had buried deep inside. But I also knew that the only way I could fully move forward was by making peace with the past, even if it meant letting Mia back into the picture, in whatever form that took. I took a deep breath, then typed out a reply. Send me your collection. But know this, Mia, I've already moved on. And I'm no longer the person you knew. If you want to show me your work, I'll look. But I won't be waiting for your apology anymore. I've forgiven you, but I'm no longer the person I was before. I sent it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Mia's collection arrived a week later, and I saw it for what it was, an attempt at redemption. It wasn't perfect, but there was something real in it. The same fire I had once seen in her was there, buried beneath the pain and mistakes. She was trying to rebuild just as I had done. I didn't feel the need to tear her down. Instead, I saw the value in her work, the potential for growth. But I also realized that we were no longer rivals. Mia had her own path to walk, and so did I. The journey I had taken was mine, and the lessons I had learned, the strength I had gained, could never be taken from me. I sent her a message back. You've come a long way. Keep going. I'm rooting for you. It was time for me to let go. Letting go of Mia, of the anger of the betrayal, it wasn't about forgiving her. It was about freeing myself from the past. I had already created my own legacy, and it was time to let that legacy stand on its own. As I stood in front of my new collection, watching it take life on the runway, I felt something I hadn't in so long: peace. The battle had ended. I had won not because I had destroyed Mia, but because I had built something that no one could take away. The future was mine to create. Months had passed, and the weight of the past had finally begun to fade. I was no longer haunted by the betrayal Mia had inflicted on me. In fact, I had grown into something much stronger, something unshakable. My designs were being worn by some of the most influential figures in fashion. My name was no longer just Ruby the designer. It was Ruby the force behind a brand that stood for resilience, creativity, and authenticity. But with this newfound success came an undeniable truth. The battle for my future wasn't over. Mia's silence, the way she had stepped away from the spotlight, had left an emptiness in my heart. I had gotten everything I wanted professionally, but I was still trying to piece together the shattered parts of myself that Mia had left behind. It was during this period of reflection that I began to question something more profound. I had spent so much of my life fighting for others to see me, but in the process, I had neglected the most important person in the equation, myself. I had spent so long trying to prove something to the world, but I never stopped to ask, what do I want from all of this? It was a question that took me to a place I hadn't expected: the realization that success, no matter how grand, could never fill the emotional void left by betrayal. As much as I wanted to put it all behind me, as much as I wanted to keep moving forward, I knew that I still needed to heal. I still needed to find peace, not just in my career, but in my soul. I began focusing on things outside of the fashion world, things that allowed me to reconnect with myself. I took time to travel, to explore places I had never seen. I met people who weren't connected to the industry, and they reminded me of the person I used to be before all of this. I reconnected with old friends, people who had supported me long before Mia had come into the picture. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. One evening, while I was in Paris at a small cafe that overlooked the Seine, I sat and thought about everything. I thought about the journey, the heartbreak, the moments of triumph, and the moments of vulnerability. And then I realized something. I had been so focused on the outcome, the success, the fame, the applause that I had forgotten to enjoy the journey itself. I had spent so much time trying to outrun the past to prove that I was more than just a victim of betrayal that I had missed the beauty of simply being. I had never taken the time to appreciate what I had built, what I had accomplished, not just in my career, but in who I had become. I sat there in the quiet of Paris, watching the lights flicker on the river, and I felt a peace settle within me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I was finally at peace with who I was, and that was enough. The next morning, I flew back to New York ready to face the next chapter. The world I had built wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was all I needed to keep moving forward. Mia had taken something from me, yes, but in the end, she had also given me the greatest gift of all, the strength to rebuild, to rise again, and to create a future that was truly my own. As I walked into my studio, I looked at my designs, each one a testament to the journey I had taken. The mistakes, the lessons, the pain, it had all led me here. And now, I was ready for what came next. No more looking over my shoulder, no more holding on to the past. This was the beginning of the rest of my life. The days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The buzz of Fashion Week and the subsequent media storm had died down, but my name had become a permanent fixture in the fashion world. I was no longer the underdog. I was Ruby the designer, who had rebuilt herself, who had risen from the ashes of betrayal. My collection was being showcased globally, and my brand was quickly gaining recognition as a symbol of strength and resilience. But even with all the success, I realized that there was still something missing, a new purpose. The success was wonderful, but it wasn't enough. The adrenaline of proving myself had faded, and I knew that I was ready for something deeper, something that would outlast the headlines and the awards. I needed to create a legacy, not just as a designer, but as someone who could make a lasting impact. I knew I wanted to do something that mattered not just for me, but for others who were struggling with their own battles. I began to focus on giving back. I partnered with charities that supported women in the arts, offering mentorship and resources to young designers who had the potential to change the industry but didn't have the means to do so. I wanted to make sure that the next generation of creators didn't have to fight as hard as I did. I wanted them to know that even when the world seems to be against you, there is always room to rise again. One of the most meaningful projects I started was a scholarship for underprivileged women pursuing a career in fashion design. I wanted to create a space where women could feel empowered to follow their passion regardless of their background. The scholarship was my way of sharing what I had learned, the strength, the determination, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, we can find the light and turn it into something beautiful. As I worked on this initiative, I started to reflect on the journey I had been through from the first moments of betrayal to the moment I stood on that runway at Fashion Week. The pain, the struggles, the isolation, all of it had led me to this moment. I had built something that not only reflected my strength, but also my ability to give back to make a difference. But even with all the progress, I couldn't forget what Mia had done. It wasn't the betrayal that haunted me. It was the idea that she had been so desperate to prove herself that she had destroyed someone else in the process. And in that, I saw a lesson that I wanted to pass on to others. Success doesn't mean taking from others to elevate yourself. True success comes when we lift others along with us, when we build each other up instead of tearing each other down. Months later, I was invited to give a keynote speech at a major fashion conference. The audience was filled with young, hopeful designers, just like I had been when I first started. As I stood on that stage, I felt a deep sense of peace. I wasn't speaking just for me anymore. I was speaking for every woman who had been doubted, who had been told they couldn't make it, who had been pushed aside by others trying to climb higher. I am Ruby, and I am here to remind you that your voice matters. Your work matters. And no matter how many times you fall, you can rise again. Let your journey, your struggles be the thing that makes you stronger, not weaker. Don't let anyone tell you that you aren't enough. You are more than enough. The crowd erupted in applause, and I felt a surge of emotion that I hadn't expected. I wasn't just a designer anymore. I was a mentor, a role model, a beacon of what was possible when you fought for what you believed in. As I left the stage, I realized that I had achieved something far more valuable than fame or success. I had built a legacy not of fashion, but of empowerment. I had created a space where other women could find their voice, their strength, and their future. Mia's actions had driven me to this point, but I didn't need her anymore. I didn't need anyone to validate my journey. I had built my own path, and it was one that led to a future where I could help others build theirs. And as I looked out at the sea of faces, I knew that my legacy wasn't just the designs I created, but the lives I touched along the way. The journey I had taken wasn't just about building a brand, it was about building a life that was meaningful. As I continued to grow, so did the impact I had on those around me. The mentorship programs flourished. The scholarships helped dozens of young women find their footing in the fashion industry, and my own work continued to inspire countless others. But despite all the success and fulfillment, a part of me still needed one more thing: closure with the past. I had worked so hard to get here, and it had been a long time since I had truly allowed myself to reflect on everything that had led me to this point. Mia had been a catalyst for much of my journey, but I had spent so many years running away from that pain, from that betrayal, that I had never really taken the time to understand its full impact on me. It was time to face it. One afternoon, I received an unexpected invitation. It was from Mia. The message was short, but it cut right to the point. Ruby, I know it's been a long time, but I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us, and I need to see you one last time. I owe you that much. At first, I hesitated. The idea of facing Mia again, of reopening old wounds, made my stomach turn. But deep down, I knew that this was the last piece I needed to move forward completely. This wasn't about forgiving her. It was about understanding the full weight of what happened so I could finally release it. I agreed to meet. We met at a quiet park far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Mia was already sitting on a bench looking out at the trees. She looked different. More at peace, perhaps. The intensity in her eyes had softened, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the anger I once had toward her. When she saw me, she stood up and hesitated for a moment as if unsure of how to approach me. But she didn't need to say anything. We both knew why we were there. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said quietly, her voice almost breaking. I don't even know if I can forgive myself, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I did, and I wanted to say that I'm sorry. Not just for stealing your designs, but for everything I took from you. I wanted to be someone else so badly, Ruby, that I lost myself in the process, and I took you down with me. I'm sorry for that. I took a deep breath. It was hard to hear her say these words, but there was something about the sincerity in her voice that made it feel like the first step toward healing for both of us. I don't need you to forgive yourself, Mia, I said softly, but I appreciate that you're here, and I appreciate you saying it. There was a long silence, the kind of silence that was filled with years of regret loss and unspoken words. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that let us both sit with the truth of what had happened. We were both lost, I finally said, the weight of it settling in. You were lost in your own way, and I was lost trying to prove myself. We were both trying to find something outside of ourselves. But now we have to find it within. Mia nodded slowly. I've been trying to rebuild. I know it won't ever be the same, but I hope that someday we can look back on this and see that it wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the strength we gained from it. I looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment I realized that Mia and I were no longer in competition. We had both fought our own battles, and we had both come out stronger because of it. I don't think we'll ever be the same, I said, but I think we've both found our way. And maybe that's the point. We had to go through this to become who we are meant to be. Mia smiled faintly, and for the first time in a long while I saw the spark of hope in her eyes. "Goodbye, Ruby," she said softly. "I'm glad we finally got this moment." I nodded. "Goodbye, Mia." As I walked away from her, I felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. I had faced my past, and now it was time to truly leave it behind. I didn't need closure from Mia anymore. I didn't need her apology to move forward. I had already done the work. I had already healed. The truth was, I had always been my own closure. I had always been the one who had to rebuild, and I had always been the one to carry the strength to move on. As I left the park, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't a weight that Mia could take away. It was a weight I had carried for myself, and now I was free. Time moves forward, and so did I. The success, the struggles, the battles, everything had brought me here to this moment, to this place of quiet peace. As the years passed, I became a figure in fashion that represented not just innovation, but also authenticity and resilience. My brand grew into something much bigger than just a name on a label. It became a movement that encouraged people, especially women, to stand strong in their truth, to fight for what they believed in, and to never give up, no matter the obstacles in their path. But even with all the triumphs, I knew deep down that the journey I had been on wasn't solely about building a career or gaining recognition. It was about something deeper, something personal. It was about finding my own peace, and more importantly, creating a space where others could find it too. I had achieved the success I dreamed of as a designer, but the real victory was finding myself again. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about Mia. It wasn't about proving anything to the world. It was about understanding that I had always been enough. The strength I had built from the pain, the lessons I had learned from the betrayals, I now saw them as the foundation of who I was meant to be. And then just when I thought my story had reached its final chapter, Mia returned. The phone call came unexpectedly. "Ruby." Her voice was familiar yet distant. "I need to speak with you." For a split second, I hesitated. The years of silence, the finality of our last conversation flooded my mind. But I had learned so much from this journey, one of the most important lessons being that there are no real final chapters. Every ending is just the beginning of something new. "I'm listening," I said, my voice calm but guarded. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not expecting us to be friends again." Mia began, her voice softer now, no longer filled with anger or arrogance. "But I've been through a lot of soul searching, and I want you to know that I've changed. I'm not the person I was. I've spent the last few years trying to rebuild my life without trying to tear anyone down." I closed my eyes and listened the weight of her words settling in. For so long I had carried the pain of her betrayal. For so long I had carried the anger. But now, years later, I understood something that I hadn't. Before her betrayal wasn't just her burden, it was mine too. And while I had worked so hard to rebuild my life, I had never allowed myself to release that final bit of anger toward her. "I don't know what you want from me," I said, my voice steady. "But I've already let go of the anger, Mia. You can't change the past, but you've given me a chance to find peace with it." There was a long silence on the other end. Mia took a deep breath before speaking again. "I'm not asking for you to take me back into your life," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I regret what I did. And I wanted to thank you for being the person who showed me what real strength looks like. It wasn't in taking from others, but in building something meaningful." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I don't know if we'll ever be friends again, but I can accept that. I'm proud of who I've become, and I hope you're proud of who you've become too." "I am," she whispered. And with that, our conversation ended. I didn't feel closure in the traditional sense, not the kind where you expect to make peace and move on in a perfect bow. But I did feel something else, a sense of release. I had forgiven Mia, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. And that was all I needed. The world I had fought for, the success I had built, was no longer clouded by the shadows of my past. I was free. Free to continue building my legacy, free to live a life that was my own, free from the need for validation from anyone, including Mia. And so I moved forward. Not as someone defined by the past, but as someone who had turned that past into the very fuel that drove her forward. I looked to the future with open eyes, open arms, and a heart full of hope. The best was yet to come. The months that followed my final meeting with Mia were the most transformative of my life. I had finally found peace with the past, and with that peace came a newfound clarity. The journey I had taken, full of heartbreak, betrayal, and redemption, had shaped me into someone who no longer sought validation from others. I had created my own identity, and for the first time, I truly felt whole. But while I had let go of the anger and resentment toward Mia, I hadn't forgotten the lessons I learned from her betrayal. Those lessons weren't just about trust or business. They were about resilience. They were about the fact that the real strength lies not in how we recover from failure, but in how we rise up after being knocked down. With that mindset, I began to shift my focus, again this time, to the future. I had established myself in the fashion world, but there was more I wanted to achieve. More people I wanted to reach, more lives I wanted to touch, more women I wanted to empower. The success I had built in the fashion industry was just the beginning. One day I was sitting in my office reviewing the latest designs for my upcoming collection when I received a message that would change everything. It was from an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Sophia, a fellow designer I had met early in my career. She'd always been a quiet, humble person, one of the few who had always believed in my potential, even when I didn't believe in myself. "Ruby," her message began, "I've been watching you, and I think we could do something incredible together. I've started a foundation to help underprivileged women break into the fashion industry, and I need someone like you to help me lead it." At first, I was stunned. A foundation helping women enter the industry. This was the exact kind of opportunity I had been waiting for, an opportunity to use my platform, my brand, for something bigger than myself. This wasn't just about clothes anymore. This was about creating real change. I immediately agreed to meet with Sophia. We spent hours discussing her vision for the foundation, the ways we could provide mentorship, scholarships, and resources to women who had the talent but lacked the means to succeed. It was everything I had always wanted to do, but never knew how to start. "This isn't just about teaching them how to design," Sophia explained. "It's about showing them that they don't have to follow the traditional paths. They can build their own futures just like you did." The more I listened to her, the more I knew that this was the next chapter in my life. The fashion industry had given me everything: success, recognition, and a platform. But now it was time to give back. To help those who had been overlooked, those who had been told they weren't good enough, and to show them that their dreams were just as valid as anyone else's. We launched the foundation that summer, and from the very first day, it was clear that it was going to make a difference. We began receiving applications from women all over the world, each one with their own story of struggle and ambition. We provided scholarships for fashion schools, connected them with established designers for mentorship, and most importantly, we gave them a space to thrive. As I watched the foundation grow, I realized that this was where my true legacy would be built. not on the number of collections I created or the awards I won, but on the lives I impacted along the way. My designs would be remembered, yes, but it was the change I helped create that would define me. One day, after a particularly successful event for the foundation, I received a message from Mia. I hadn't heard from her in months. "I saw what you've been doing," she wrote. "You've turned everything into something beautiful, Ruby. I never expected to see this side of you. I'm proud of you." I smiled softly as I read her words. In a way, Mia had given me the final gift I needed. She had given me the space to grow to become something more than what I had been. And even though our paths had diverged long ago, there was a quiet sense of closure in that message. Not because I needed her approval, but because I had found the peace I needed to move forward, and that peace had nothing to do with her or anyone else. As I sat in my office looking out over the city, I thought about all the things I had gone through: the betrayal, the loss, the rebuilding. And I realized that every part of the journey had been necessary to get me to this moment. Without the darkness, there could be no light. Without the pain, there could be no healing. I was no longer defined by what happened to me. I was defined by what I chose to do with it. And the next chapter, it was just beginning. It's strange the way life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Just as I had finally found the peace I was looking for, a new chapter began to unfold in ways I had never imagined. The foundation I had started to support underprivileged women in fashion had grown beyond my expectations. Our mentorship programs were thriving. Young designers were flourishing, and I had witnessed firsthand the impact we were making on the lives of these women. But the real change had happened within me. I realized that I no longer needed to prove anything. The battles I had fought, the betrayals I had endured, and the dreams I had once chased so desperately, they were all part of who I had become, but they no longer defined me. I was no longer Ruby, the survivor of betrayal, Ruby, the designer out for revenge. I was Ruby, the woman who had found strength not in her struggles, but in how she chose to overcome them. And now I had a chance to pass that strength on to others. One afternoon, while I was preparing for a major gala event to support the foundation, I sat down at my desk reflecting on everything I had built. From the early days of sketching designs on napkins with Mia, to the bustling, vibrant organization we had created together, there was so much I had learned along the way. But more than that, I realized I had built a legacy that would outlast the fleeting trends of fashion. This was a legacy rooted in empowerment, in lifting others, in showing women that their worth wasn't defined by anyone but themselves. This wasn't just a career, it was a calling. It was a chance to leave behind something meaningful that could transcend time, place, and circumstance. The gala event was a massive success. It was more than just a fundraiser, it was a celebration of the women who had come through the foundation, the designers who had defied the odds and now stood proudly in their own skin, creating the future of fashion. As I looked out at the sea of smiling faces, I felt a sense of pride I had never felt before. This was my real legacy, not my collections, not the awards, but the lives I had helped change, the opportunities I had created. And as the night ended, and I stood alone in the back of the hall, the quiet of the night settling over me, I realized something else. Something I had never fully understood until now. The greatest gift I could give wasn't just mentorship or financial support. It wasn't just a platform. It was hope. Hope that no matter where you come from, no matter what obstacles stand in your way, you can rise. You can take control of your destiny. And most importantly, you can create a future on your own terms. I had given them the tools to build a career, but more than that, I had given them the tools to build a life. The following year, I received an invitation to speak at a global conference on women's empowerment. It was a moment I could have only dreamed of just a few years ago. Standing on that stage with the bright lights shining down on me, I thought about everything that had brought me here. the struggles, the losses, the betrayals, but instead of feeling weighed down by them, I felt liberated. My journey hasn't been easy. I began my voice steady and strong, but it's been worth every step. Because every battle, every moment of pain has taught me one thing, that you are the architect of your own future. And no one can take that away from you. As the crowd erupted in applause, I smiled to myself, not because I was the one standing at the front of the room, but because I knew the future I was creating wasn't just for me. It was for every woman who had ever doubted herself. It was for every person who had been told they couldn't make it. I had created a space where their voices could be heard, where their stories could be told. This wasn't the end of my journey, it was just the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter where the work I did wasn't just about creating beautiful things. It was about creating change, creating opportunities, creating legacies that would outlast us all. And as I walked off that stage, I knew that my true legacy wasn't just in the designs I created. It was in the lives I had touched, the hearts I had changed, and the future I had helped shape. The years following the foundation's success were a blur of excitement and fulfillment. My life had shifted in ways I had never expected. From being a designer to becoming a mentor, a teacher, a guide for young women, my role in the fashion industry had evolved into something much bigger than I could have imagined. I had built a brand that wasn't just about the clothes I created, but about the stories I shared, the lives I impacted, and the future I was helping to shape. I had given myself fully to the work, to the purpose that I had found. But even as everything around me seemed perfect, something inside me whispered that my journey wasn't finished yet. There was still one more thing I needed to do. One afternoon, I was having coffee with Sophia, my close friend and business partner in the foundation. As we chatted about our next plans and the women we were empowering, she looked at me thoughtfully, her gaze steady. "Ruby," she said, her voice softer than usual, "you've done so much for others. But have you thought about doing something for yourself, something that's just about you?" Her question lingered in the air, a question I hadn't asked myself in years. What was I missing? I had everything I ever wanted in terms of career influence and impact. Yet as Sophia asked that simple question, I realized that I hadn't given myself space to truly explore what I wanted outside of everything I had built. The truth was, I had spent so long trying to rise above the hurt, the betrayal, and the challenges that I had never fully embraced the quiet joys of life. I hadn't taken the time to think about the kind of personal life I wanted outside of the professional milestones I had achieved. And so with Sophia's encouragement, I took a step back. I allowed myself to take a breather and think about what I truly desired. I traveled not for work, but for the first time in years, just for myself. I explored new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and spent time in places that weren't tied to my career or my brand. In one of those moments of quiet reflection as I sat by the ocean on a peaceful beach in Bali, it hit me. I had spent my whole life building a legacy for others, but I had forgotten to build a life for myself. I had been so focused on shaping the future of fashion and empowering women that I had neglected my own happiness and personal fulfillment. And then, like a light bulb turning on, I understood the legacy I wanted to leave behind didn't just need to be about the work I did for others. It needed to be about the life I lived for myself. When I returned to New York, I decided to make some changes. I took a sabbatical from the fashion world for a few months, stepping away from the public eye. I found a small, quiet apartment in the city, away from the constant whirlwind of meetings and events. I reconnected with my roots, taking time for myself in ways I had never allowed before. I read books, painted, explored the city without a schedule. It was during this time that I realized something profound. I had been chasing something outside of myself for so long that I had forgotten to ask, what brings me joy? What makes my heart sing when no one is watching? I spent the next several months focusing on myself, not as a brand, not as a mentor, but as Ruby, the woman who had lived through it all. I started writing not for anyone else, but for myself. My journal became a sanctuary where I could pour out my thoughts, my feelings, my dreams. I rediscovered the love I had for writing that had once been overshadowed by the demands of fashion and success. And in the midst of all this, I realized that the work I had done in the fashion world, the foundation I had built, it would always be a part of me. But it wasn't the only part of me. There was so much more to life than achievements and milestones. One evening, as I sat in my new apartment overlooking the city skyline, I smiled to myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly content. I had given the world everything I had, and now it was time to give myself something just as valuable, the freedom to live fully and without regret. The future was still unwritten, but for the first time, I was excited to see where it would take me. Not as a designer, not as a mentor, but simply as Ruby, the woman who had learned to love herself fully. And I was ready for whatever came next. The months following my time off were some of the most reflective and transformative of my life. I had given so much to my career, to the industry, and to my foundation. But now, with the space I had carved out for myself, I began to realize that I was still evolving, still uncovering new layers of who I was meant to be. The world was changing, and so was I. The foundation I had built was thriving, and it had become more than I had ever dreamed. We were no longer just offering scholarships and mentorship. We were creating an ecosystem for women to thrive in all aspects of their lives, not just their careers. The program had expanded globally, and I had the privilege of meeting countless women from all walks of life, each with their own story, their own struggles, and their own dreams. In many ways, the foundation had become my true legacy, the place where my real impact would live long after my collections faded into history. But even with all the progress we had made, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to be done, more women to help, more communities to change, more barriers to break. One day, as I sat in my office reviewing applications for a new mentorship initiative, a thought struck me. We had already begun expanding our reach into fashion education, but what about the world beyond? What about other industries where women still struggled to break through the glass ceiling? What about the women in tech, healthcare, business industries where representation was still lacking, where opportunities were limited, and where the journey to success was even more difficult? That afternoon, I called a meeting with Sophia, my trusted partner in the foundation. I laid out my vision, the idea of expanding our work beyond fashion. It was time to shift the focus from solely the fashion industry to empowering women across every field, creating opportunities for women to find their voices, to lead, and to innovate, regardless of the industry they worked in. We've already created a powerful platform for women in fashion, I said. But why stop there? We have the chance to make an impact on a much larger scale. Women are changing the world in every field, and we need to be part of that change. Sophia listened intently, her eyes lighting up as I spoke. She had always believed in the potential of what we were doing, but this was different. This wasn't just about one industry or one community. It was about changing the world. We can do it, she said with conviction. We've built a foundation on trust, resilience, and empowerment. Now it's time to expand that message. Let's make sure that no matter what industry a woman enters, she has the tools, the support, and the confidence to succeed. And so the next chapter of our journey began. We started a new initiative aimed at empowering women in every field, from tech to healthcare to business. We partnered with organizations that supported women's leadership development in these sectors and began offering scholarships, mentorship programs, and networking opportunities. We created spaces for women to learn from one another, to push each other to new heights, and to break down the barriers that had been holding them back for far too long. As I watched this new initiative take shape, I realized something. It wasn't just about giving women the tools to succeed. It was about giving them permission to succeed, to take up space, to lead with their voices and their visions. It was about showing the world that women's success wasn't limited to a few industries or to a few lucky individuals. It was about making the world see that women could thrive anywhere and everywhere. The response was overwhelming. We saw women from all over the world step forward sharing their stories, their struggles, and their aspirations. They weren't just applying for scholarships, they were applying for the opportunity to make a difference, to be part of something bigger than themselves. And I knew that this was just the beginning. As I continued to watch our programs grow, I realized that the true impact of what we were building wasn't just in the opportunities we were creating for others, but in the way we were changing the narrative about what women were capable of. We were no longer defined by the industries we entered, the barriers we faced, or the struggles we endured. We were defined by the strength we found in each other, by the communities we built, and by the future we were creating together. I was no longer just Ruby the designer. I was Ruby the woman who had learned to build something far bigger than a brand, a legacy that would transcend the boundaries of fashion and reach across every industry, every community, every corner of the world. And as I looked to the future, I knew that this was only the beginning. There were still more stories to be told, more barriers to be broken, and more women to lift up. But this time, I wasn't doing it alone. Together, we were creating a future where women could not only succeed, but lead, innovate, and inspire the world. Years passed, and with each passing day, I found myself drawn deeper into the work I had started. The foundation continued to thrive, growing not only in size, but in impact. Our message had spread far and wide, touching the lives of women across continents. It was no longer just about fashion or the opportunities within one industry. It was about changing the narrative of what women could achieve in any field. We had helped thousands of women break through barriers, and now the foundation was a well-established global presence. But even as our reach expanded, I knew there was still more to do. There were still women out there who hadn't found their voice. Still barriers that had not been broken, still industries that were closed off to women who had so much potential but lacked the opportunity. I'd often found myself caught up in the whirlwind of events, meetings, and projects, but as time passed, I began to understand something deeper. The true measure of our success wasn't just in the numbers, the accolades, or the visibility we gained. It was in the quiet moments, the ones where I could see the change in someone's eyes, the realization that they had broken through their own limitations. That was the real victory. One morning, as I sat with Sophia discussing our upcoming programs, I realized how far we had come. But in that same moment, I also realized that the work we had done wasn't just changing the lives of the women we helped, it had transformed me in ways I never imagined. The woman I had become, the one who had risen from betrayal and hardship, was now someone who could build legacies. I was no longer just Ruby, the designer who overcame betrayal. I was Ruby, the architect of opportunity for others, the one who helped build a path for women to walk freely and confidently in any world they chose. As I thought about this, I realized something important. My legacy wasn't about being the most famous designer or winning the most prestigious awards. It was about creating something bigger than myself, something that would last long after I was gone. It was about leaving behind a movement, a mindset, and a community that believed in the power of women to reshape the future. And then came the opportunity I had been waiting for. I was invited to speak at the United Nations, at a global summit on gender equality and women's empowerment. This invitation wasn't just an acknowledgement of my work, it was a recognition of everything we had built. This moment was about more than me. It was about the collective work of every woman who had ever been a part of this journey, who had ever believed in the power of change. The day of the summit arrived, and as I stood before the sea of global leaders, activists, and changemakers, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was the moment I had been waiting for, not the applause, not the recognition, but the chance to stand for something greater than myself. As I began my speech, I reflected on my own journey, how far I had come from the days of doubt, from the pain of betrayal. I spoke not just of the women we had helped, but of the future we were all creating together. I spoke of resilience, of the importance of building bridges, not walls. And most importantly, I spoke of the responsibility we all had to create a world where women could rise without barriers, without fear, and without limits. This isn't just about women, I said, my voice steady. This is about humanity. The empowerment of women is the empowerment of the world. When women are free to thrive, we all thrive. The future isn't just about breaking glass ceilings. It's about building new worlds where every woman has the opportunity to shape her own destiny. The room was silent as my words settled in, but soon it erupted into applause. In that moment, I realized that everything I had done, everything I had built, wasn't just about making a statement. It was about creating lasting change. It was about reshaping the future. After the summit, as I stood outside looking up at the vast sky, I felt the weight of my journey, the weight of everything we had achieved. But it wasn't a weight that burdened me. It was a weight that filled me with pride, with peace, and with the understanding that my journey, our journey, was far from over. Far. As I walked back into the world I had built, I realized that the future I was creating wasn't just about me or the foundation. It was about every woman who would come after me. It was about the paths we would pave for those who would follow, those who would carry the torch and continue the work we had started. The work was far from over. The future was still unwritten. But now, more than ever, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. And as I looked ahead, I knew that the best was yet to come. It was a quiet morning when I received a message that would change everything. My phone buzzed with an unexpected notification, a new email from an old acquaintance. I opened it, half expecting another inquiry about speaking engagements or another offer to collaborate. But instead, it was from an unknown name, Emily Carson, CEO of ReachTech Inc. Dear Ruby, I hope this message finds you well. I have followed your work with the foundation and am deeply moved by your commitment to empowering women in all industries. I wanted to reach out because I believe we can work together to create something extraordinary. Our company is pioneering new technology in education and mentorship, and we are looking for a strategic partner to help bring this vision to women globally. We believe that with your expertise in mentorship and your vision for women's empowerment, we can change the world. I would love to discuss further if you are open to exploring this opportunity. The email left me staring at the screen, my mind racing. It was as if the universe had thrown an unexpected curveball into my life, presenting an opportunity I hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about fashion anymore. This wasn't just about mentorship in the traditional sense. This was about harnessing technology using innovation to accelerate the change I had been working toward for years. I didn't hesitate to respond. The very next day, I set up a meeting with Emily. When I arrived at ReachTech's headquarters, I was met with a modern, sleek office that radiated innovation. The energy in the building was palpable, full of forward-thinking minds who were focused on one mission to make a difference. Emily greeted me warmly, and we wasted no time getting into the heart of the discussion. Ruby, we've been tracking your work and the impact you've had on women through your foundation. Emily began, her voice filled with excitement. We believe that if we combine your mentorship model with our technology, we can build an infrastructure that will allow women in remote areas, women in marginalized communities, and women in industries where they're typically underrepresented to access the same level of opportunity. Think about it, a global network of women helping women powered by technology. The idea was so simple, yet so revolutionary. Imagine a world where every woman, no matter her background, no matter her location, could access the mentorship resources and networks she needed to thrive. where geographical barriers, financial obstacles, and lack of access to education were no longer a hindrance. It was an ambitious goal, but the potential to create real lasting change was undeniable. We're in a digital age now, I said, my mind spinning with the possibilities. The power of technology can connect us in ways we never imagined. What if we could give women the tools to access knowledge skills and networks at the push of a button? What if we could ensure that no woman anywhere is left behind? Emily's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. Exactly. This is more than just a partnership. This is about scaling the impact we've already made, creating a blueprint for women's empowerment that extends far beyond what we've ever seen. As I sat there listening to her, I realized that this was the next step in the evolution of my legacy. I had spent years creating opportunities for women in fashion, and now I had the chance to do something even bigger. With a combination of technology and mentorship, we could revolutionize the way women accessed opportunities, from education to business to leadership. We spent hours discussing the logistics, the tech platforms we would use, the resources we would need to bring this vision to life. As the conversation unfolded, I could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just an opportunity to expand what I had already built. It was an opportunity to amplify the ripple effect we had started and take it global. By the end of the meeting, we had already made plans to move forward. We would work together to create an online platform where women could connect, learn and grow, where mentors could reach women in remote villages, where business leaders could offer guidance to young entrepreneurs, where women could access educational resources no matter where they lived. The next few months were a whirlwind of meetings, collaborations, and planning. We developed a prototype, tested it with women in various communities, and watched it take shape into something greater than we could have imagined. The platform wasn't just a tool for learning. It was a network for empowerment, a place where women could find the support and guidance they needed to succeed. As the platform launched, I couldn't help but marvel at how far we had come. What started as an idea, a spark of inspiration in a small meeting room, had now become a global initiative, reaching women from all corners of the world. The message was clear: when women support each other, incredible things happen. And as the program expanded, I saw the impact in real time. Women from rural villages in India, business owners in Africa, young designers in South America, all of them were using the platform to connect, learn, and build. It wasn't just about giving them opportunities, it was about showing them that they could take their futures into their own hands. Looking back, I realized how far I had come from that woman who once felt lost in a world of competition, betrayal, and self-doubt. I had found my purpose building a legacy of empowerment, creating opportunities for women to rise no matter where they were or where they came from. And in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning. Together, we would change the world. As the years continued to unfold, the world around me seemed to shift in unexpected ways. The global initiatives we had started, the programs that had once seemed like distant dreams, had now become living, breathing entities. Women all over the world were embracing their power, finding their voice, and stepping into their purpose. The foundation was no longer just an idea, it had become a force, one that had impacted generations and would continue to do so for years to come. I had always believed that our work was important, that the change we were creating mattered, but it was only in these quiet moments of reflection that I fully understood the magnitude of what we had achieved. When I first started this journey, I had set out to empower women in fashion. But what had come out of it was so much more a revolution of empowerment that stretched beyond the boundaries of the fashion industry and reached into every corner of the world. It was about education, about mentorship, about creating pathways for women to take their rightful place at the table, regardless of their background or circumstances. As I sat in my office one afternoon going over the latest statistics from our global programs, I felt a sense of pride. Not the kind of pride that comes from personal achievement, but the kind of pride that comes from knowing that I had played a part in something larger than myself. I had helped create a space for women to thrive, and that was more than enough. But in that moment, something else stirred within me, a new desire. It was time for the next chapter. The world had changed, and so had I. I had become someone who wasn't just involved in the day-to-day of running the foundation or managing my brand. I had become a symbol of what women could achieve when they were given the tools, the resources, and the support they needed to succeed. And now I felt a deep calling to do something more, to take the lessons I had learned, the strength I had built, and the platform I had created, and use it to make an even broader impact. One evening after a long day of meetings, I called Sophia. She'd been by my side through everything, through the hard times, the triumphs, the setbacks, and the wins. She knew me better than anyone. Sophia. I began, my voice serious. It's time for us to take this even further. We've built something incredible, but I think we can do more. What if we used our platform not just for mentorship, but for advocacy? What if we became the voice for women who have yet to be heard in every corner of the world? What if we built a global coalition of women who could not only support each other, but demand that the world see us, listen to us, and recognize our worth? Sophia paused, thinking for a moment. Then in her usual calm but determined tone, she replied, "Ruby, I think you're right. We've been empowering women for years, but now it's time for us to stand up and demand change on a larger scale. We've already created the foundation, the network, and the trust. Now we need to use our voices to change the systems that have kept women from reaching their potential for so long." Her words resonated deeply with me. The world was changing, yes, but it was still far from where it needed to be. Women's voices were still marginalized in many parts of the world, and systemic barriers to equality still existed in every field. It was time to take a stand, not just as mentors and advocates, but as leaders in a global movement for change. The idea was born. We would create a platform not just for mentorship, but for advocacy, a space where women could come together to unite their voices and push for real, tangible change in policies, businesses, governments, and cultures. It wasn't enough to empower women from the inside. It was time to shake the foundations of the world around us. In the months that followed, we began organizing a global summit, one that would bring together women from every industry, every corner of the world, and give them the tools they needed to amplify their voices in unison. We reached out to leaders in business politics, education, and social justice to be part of this movement. It was the largest and most ambitious project we'd ever undertaken. The Global Women's Empowerment Summit was a turning point. It brought together thousands of women from every continent, all of them united by one common goal: to create a world where women were equal partners in shaping the future. The event was groundbreaking. It wasn't just about celebrating achievements. It was about demanding that the world finally acknowledge the strength, the power, and the potential of women. As I stood on stage addressing the summit, I looked out at the crowd, at the faces of women who had fought so hard to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. I realized that this was the moment we had been waiting for. This was the culmination of everything we had worked for. This was the dawn of a new era. "This isn't just about us," I said, my voice steady and full of conviction. "This is about every woman who has ever been told she's not enough. This is about every woman who has fought to be heard. And this is about every woman who will come after us. We will not be silenced. We will not be overlooked. We will stand united and demand a world that recognizes our worth." The crowd erupted into applause, and in that moment I knew that we had reached a new level of empowerment. We were no longer just building platforms for women to succeed. We were building a movement that would reshape the world as we knew it. The future was unfolding before us, and I could see it clearly now. This was just the beginning. We had built the foundation. We had created the space. And now it was time to let our voices be heard louder than ever before. The success of the Global Women's Empowerment Summit marked the beginning of a new chapter in our work. What had started as a vision of empowering women in the fashion industry had expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. As I watched the summit unfold with women from every corner of the world, sharing their stories, struggles, and triumphs, I realized that the movement we had started was bigger than any one of us. It was global. The summit sparked a wave of change that spread like wildfire. Women from remote villages, major cities, and every socioeconomic background came together to form an unprecedented network of support and solidarity. The world was finally starting to see the power of women united for a common cause. It was no longer just about women overcoming obstacles, it was about reshaping the future one woman at a time. But this was only the beginning. In the months that followed, we began rolling out new initiatives that would make the vision of a truly global women's network a reality. We partnered with international corporations, educational institutions, and governments to create programs that would provide women with the tools they needed to succeed, not just in business, but in all aspects of life. We worked to break down the barriers that held women back in politics, healthcare technology, and other fields, ensuring that they had the resources and support necessary to thrive. As the network grew, so did the impact. We saw women start their own businesses, lead social change, and enter fields previously dominated by men. Young girls from every corner of the globe began to see themselves in the women who had come before them, role models who proved that anything was possible no matter where you came from. One of the proudest moments of my life came when we launched the Women Leading Change program. This initiative aimed to identify, mentor, and support the next generation of women leaders, ensuring they had the skills, knowledge, and network to take on the challenges of tomorrow. We partnered with universities and tech companies to provide scholarships, internships, and leadership training, ensuring that women had the education and experiences necessary to become leaders in every industry. As I traveled to various countries to speak and meet with these future leaders, I began to see the true power of this global network. Women were no longer just passively participating in the world, they were actively shaping it. They were using their voices to demand better policies, more representation, and a future where women's contributions were valued as much as men's. It was during this time that I realized the full extent of the transformation we had ignited. This was no longer just a movement, it was a revolution. We were creating a new world, a world where women were no longer fighting to be seen or heard, but leading the way forward. One evening, as I sat in a quiet cafe in Paris reflecting on the journey, I received a call that would forever alter the course of this movement. It was from a political leader, someone I had worked with in the past to support women's rights initiatives. She had just been appointed to a key position in the United Nations and wanted to discuss an idea with me. "Ruby," she said, "I've been thinking a lot about the work we're doing. And I believe it's time for us to push for a global treaty on women's rights, something that will ensure equal representation, access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity for women everywhere. I want you to be a part of this. We need you." The gravity of her words struck me like a bolt of lightning. A global treaty, a law that would guarantee women's rights on a global scale. The idea had always seemed like a distant dream, something that might never come to fruition, but now it was within reach. "I'm in," I replied without hesitation. "Let's make it happen." The months that followed were filled with intense preparation. We worked tirelessly with world leaders, activists, and organizations to draft the framework for the treaty, ensuring it would address the root causes of inequality and provide concrete steps to address the gender disparities that existed worldwide. The negotiations were difficult, and at times it felt like we were fighting an uphill battle. But with every challenge, I saw the unwavering resolve of the women around me. We weren't just pushing for a policy change, we were fighting for a future where women could live freely without fear of discrimination or oppression. Finally, after years of hard work, the treaty was signed. The world had agreed to a binding framework that would guarantee equal rights and opportunities for women everywhere. It was a historic moment, one that would reshape the global landscape for generations to come. As I stood before the assembled leaders holding the document in my hands, I couldn't help but think back to the beginning of this journey. The woman who had once been betrayed, who had fought to rise again, who had fought for her place in the world. I had come a long way, but the journey wasn't over. This was just the start of something far greater. We had created a new world, a world where women were no longer fighting to be seen, a world where they were leading the way. And as I looked ahead, I knew that the legacy we had built would continue to shape the future of women everywhere. The ripple effect had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The global treaty we had worked so hard for was finally signed, and the world stood on the precipice of a new era. It wasn't just a victory for women, it was a victory for humanity. For the first time, there was a universal agreement that women's rights were human rights, that equality was not a privilege, but a fundamental right. The treaty would guarantee equal representation access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity for women everywhere. I stood there watching the leaders sign their names on the treaty, knowing that we had changed the course of history. We had pushed, fought, and struggled for this moment, and now it was real. But even as I celebrated this monumental achievement, I knew that the work was far from over. The treaty was just the beginning, a foundation upon which we would build the future. The weeks that followed were a blur of media attention speeches and public recognition. But through all the noise, I remained focused on what really mattered, the women we had fought, for the lives we had touched, and the future we were creating. This wasn't about me or my achievements. It was about the millions of women around the world who now had a voice, a platform, and the legal backing to demand their rightful place in society. As I sat in my office reflecting on everything we had accomplished, I found myself feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the women who had come before me, who had fought and paved the way for us. Gratitude for the team of incredible women and men who had supported me every step of the way. And gratitude for the journey itself, the highs, the lows, the betrayals, and the triumphs. But there was something else that was beginning to stir within me, a sense of responsibility. Now that we had secured women's rights on a global scale, the next step was to ensure that the world followed through on these promises. The laws were in place, but the systems of power and inequality still existed. It was time to move beyond policy and focus on action. I called a meeting with Sophia and the key members of our team, as well as other global leaders and advocates who had supported our cause. Together, we began to map out a new initiative, one that would hold governments and corporations accountable for their actions. We would create a monitoring system, a platform where women could report instances of discrimination, unequal pay violence, and other violations of their rights. This system would not only expose injustices, but also provide solutions offering women access to legal and financial resources to fight back. The idea was revolutionary. We envisioned a world where women's voices were heard not just in the halls of power, but in the courts, the workplaces, and the streets. A world where every violation of a woman's rights would be met with immediate action. This platform would give women the power to seek justice, demand equality, and ensure that the promises made by the global treaty were upheld. In the months that followed, we worked tirelessly to build this platform. We collaborated with tech companies to create an easy-to-use system, partnered with legal organizations to ensure women had access to representation, and worked with governments to ensure that they upheld the commitments they had made. Slowly but surely, the platform began to take shape. And then one morning, the first report came in. It was a woman in a small village in Africa who had been denied the right to work because of her gender. She had heard about the platform through a local advocate and submitted a complaint. Within hours, we had contacted local authorities, provided her with legal support, and ensured that the company she had been working for was held accountable. That was the moment I realized how powerful this platform could be. It wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline. It was the bridge between policy and real-world change. And as more and more women began to use it, the ripple effect became clear. The world was beginning to listen. But the impact of this initiative didn't stop there. It began to change the way companies and governments approached gender equality. They knew that they could no longer ignore the issues women faced. They could no longer sweep discrimination and injustice under the rug. The platform became a powerful force for accountability, forcing change in real time. The treaty had given us the legal foundation. But this new initiative was giving us the power to enforce it, to ensure that women's rights were not just paper promises, but lived realities. And as the platform continued to grow, I knew that we had started something that could never be undone, a movement that would keep pushing for change until every woman everywhere had the opportunity to live freely, equally, and with dignity. The work was never truly finished, but I had never felt more hopeful. The future was being shaped by the voices of women, our voices, and there was nothing that could stop us now. The world had changed, and we were changing with it. The global movement we had ignited was no longer just an idea, it was a force that was reshaping the way women were seen, heard, and valued in every corner of the globe. It had started with a simple idea: empower women, and they would change the world. But what we had created together was so much more than that. As the months passed and the impact of our work continued to unfold, I realized that we were on the brink of something even greater than I could have imagined. The treaty had created a legal framework for women's rights, the platform had begun to hold companies and governments accountable, and the global network of women was stronger than ever. But there was one last piece of the puzzle that we needed to address. We had given women the tools to succeed. We had provided them with education, mentorship, and resources. But there was one more challenge we had to face, ensuring that these opportunities weren't just available to women in affluent countries or cities, but to every woman everywhere. The women in rural communities, those in conflict zones, those living in poverty. These women had been overlooked for too long. They were the ones who needed us the most. Yet they were the ones who often faced the most barriers to accessing the resources we had worked so hard to provide. It was time to take the final step. We had spent years building a movement that was about giving women a platform, but now it was time to bring the platform to them, to create a system where every woman, regardless of where she lived or her circumstances, could access the resources she needed to break free from the chains that held her back. I called Sophia and the team together to discuss our next phase. We had already made a significant impact, but it was clear that the work wasn't done yet. We had to expand our reach. We had to take our programs to the most remote and underserved areas in the world. We've built something incredible, I began, but now it's time to bring it to every corner of the world. We've been focused on empowering women in cities and business hubs, but we can't stop there. We need to ensure that every woman, no matter where she is, has access to the opportunities we've created. Sophia nodded. You're right. We've made great strides, but we still have a long way to go. The real challenge now is reaching those who need us, most those who are hardest to reach. The next phase of our journey became clear. We would partner with local organizations in rural and underserved areas to create mobile units, outreach programs, and digital access points that would bring mentorship, education, and resources directly to these women. It wasn't enough to wait for them to come to us. We had to meet them where they were. The road ahead was going to be challenging. We would need to build infrastructure in areas with limited resources, navigate political barriers, and face skepticism from those who didn't believe women in these areas could change the world. But I knew that if we had come this far, we could go further. With renewed determination, we launched our outreach program. Mobile units equipped with technology books and resources traveled to remote villages. We partnered with local leaders and activists who had already earned the trust of their communities, and we trained them to become mentors, guides, and advocates for the women who needed them the most. The programs were designed to be accessible, mobile, and flexible, allowing women to participate without leaving their communities. The results were staggering. Women who had once been invisible were now finding their voices, and with them came a wave of change. From rural villages in Afghanistan to small towns in sub-Saharan Africa, women were gaining the knowledge and confidence they needed to create their own futures. They were starting businesses, going to school, leading local governments, and demanding the rights they had been denied for so long. In one village in particular, a woman named Lila became a symbol of the power of this new movement. She had always dreamed of becoming a doctor but had been forced to marry young and raise children instead. Through the mobile programs, Lila received the education and mentorship she needed to pursue her dreams. She not only became a doctor, but opened a clinic in her village to help other women and children. Stories like Lila's were happening everywhere. Women who had once been silenced were now speaking up. Women who had been told they were not capable were now proving the world wrong. As I looked at the progress we had made, I realized that this was the true legacy of our work. It wasn't about building a platform that empowered women in cities or in positions of power. It was about building a world where every woman, no matter her circumstances, had the chance to rise. The final step of our journey had been the most rewarding one, and as I watched the impact unfold, I knew that this was the change we had been fighting for. Women were no longer waiting for permission to lead. They were leading, innovating, and changing the world. The world had been transformed, but it was only the beginning. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time I felt certain that no barrier was too great to overcome. We had created a global movement, a movement that would continue to break boundaries and redefine what women could achieve. As I stood at the forefront of this change, I realized that the future had never looked brighter. The movement we had started was no longer just about one woman's journey. It was about the journeys of millions. And together we would continue to shape the world for generations to come.